Welcome back to the Pirate Republic. This is an audiobook presentation of Pirates of the Wild West, the first novel in the Storm of Time series, released one chapter at a time. Today, me hearties, we are back to the gallows, where we had last found Blackbeard at the noose. It's time for a short trip to hell. Chapter 27, A Short Trip to Hell. Boom! With a deafening blast, the concrete wall exploded into the prison yard with such force that the entire gallows were blown over as well as everyone around it, standing upon it and hanging from a rope attached to it. To the detriment of those underneath, Edward Thatch was saved from hanging by the neck as he and the wooden structure he was attached to landed upon the spectators gathered around to see him executed. The concrete from the wall rained down upon the entire yard and its inhabitants along with wood, metal, and rocks. After the echoes of the tremendous detonation faded, the prison yard was awash with silence, as those still conscious existed in a daze, while the ringing in their ears dominated their shocked minds. Thatch rolled in pain as his hands were still tied behind his back and were useless in helping him gain his feet. Several people that were lying beneath him moved and groaned as he tried to disengage himself from the pile. His ears buzzed and his vision was blurred. Someone under him pushed him away and his shoulder lit up in agony and he was rolled once more onto his stomach. He felt hands on him, attempting to turn him over. He pivoted onto his side and his vision started to clear. He became aware of someone holding his head. He laughed a tortured cackle when a young, fearful but eager Chinese face came into focus above him. His cabin boy Tom was holding his face in his hands and shouting at him, but all he could hear was the ringing in his ears. Tom pulled a knife and stepped behind the prone Thatch. He cut his hands loose from their bonds and then loosened the noose and removed it from his neck. The boy helped Thatch sit up and then get to his feet, allowing him to lean heavily on his shoulder. Smoke and chaos filled the area. Men, women, and children were dazed and battered. Some continued to lie on the ground unconscious or dead. Thatch couldn't tell which. He stumbled to his knees and was caught by a woman, an angel in blue. He looked up at her face, and his mind was lost for a moment. He felt like he was at the bottom of the sea, weightless, floating just above the sandy floor. There she was, floating as well, blonde hair moving with the currents surrounding her perfect face. Someone grabbed his other arm, and the vision was gone as he screamed out in pain. Philip quickly let Blackbeard's left arm fall after the man almost fainted from the agony. He saw that that arm hung unnaturally at the man's side. He knew immediately that it was dislocated. He moved to the other side of the man and helped Colette and Tom guide the staggering Blackbeard out through the jagged hole made by the explosion that Philip had quickly rigged to breach the prison wall. He had packed the TNT hastily, but the desired result was obtained, even though it was a bit more force than he would have wished. He looked up to see several law enforcement officers regaining their wits and felt sure the two pirate hunters were among the frenzied crowd. He stopped and pulled another device from his satchel. This was a new item that he had been perfecting for a few months. It was a round gray ball with the texture of hardened clay. He struck a match while Colette and Tom continued with Thatch through the blast hole in the wall. He lit the wick protruding from the device and waited for it to burn close to the end. He tossed the bomb a few feet back toward the crowd, and when it hit the ground, it began to discharge a thick cloud of brown smoke that also had a very foul odor to it. He smiled to himself as this smoke would cover their escape for the time being without any more loss of life or limb. Exiting through the hole, he caught up with the others, and they stopped along the far end of the enclosure. "Lean him against the wall," Philip said. Thatch leaned back in pain against the concrete. Philip took his billfold from his pocket. "Bite down on this." Thatch allowed the leather billfold to be put between his teeth and watched as the little scientist looked over his limp arm. He put one hand on Thatch's chest, and with it pressed his back flat against the wall. Philip took Thatch's left wrist in his other hand, then counted 2 before yanking on the limp arm, painfully snapping it back into place. Thatch let out a sudden tortured scream when it happened, but relief washed over his sweating and bloody face as the pain quickly subsided. Thatch leaned over to catch his breath. He rubbed his hand on his neck that was sore to the touch. Colette moved in front of him and took his face in her hands. He looked up at her, and she smiled at him. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Aye, never better, lass," he said. "How do I look?" "Like any other vagrant after a wild night at the Paris," Colette said with a smile. "We need to go," Philip interrupted. They all nodded and followed him around the front of the prison to Broadway, where several dazed and battered people were filing out of the prison building. The streets were a mayhem of activity, as some fled the scene and others went to lend aid. Philip pointed toward the carriage that still waited on the street where Woods and Jennings had left it. Hornigold's body was being carried to the other side of the street by a few good Samaritans. Tom spotted Blackbeard's pistol belts and weapons lying in the mud and muck near the sidewalk and hurried over to pick them up. Just as he reached the weapons, he came face to face with the Chinese baker that hit him over the head the day he met Thatch. The aproned man stood only steps away from him, with a shocked look on his face as he recognized this smartly suited boy as the street urchin that had stolen rolls from him time and again. The man's intentions were clear that he was going to take the weapons before Tom had arrived. The boy narrowed his eyes at the man and moved his jacket aside to display his holstered derringer. The baker's eyes went wide as he saw the pistol. He quickly turned on his heel and hurried off, glancing back in fear that the boy was about to shoot him in the back. Tom let a half-smile slide across his face as the man ran from him. Then he gathered up the stash and rushed to join the others. Colette and Philip helped the exhausted Thatch into the carriage, and Colette rode inside with him. Tom dropped Thatch's armaments into the cab and climbed up to the driver's bench with Philip and sat down next to him. Philip grabbed the reins and snapped them with gusto, cajoling the two horses to pull the vehicle into motion. Inside the leather-lined carriage, Colette ripped a portion of the hem from her dress to wipe away the blood and dirt from Thatch's face. "You saved me life," Thatch said. "You ran up a large tab at the Paris. Just wanted to make sure you're alive to make good on it," she said as she carefully cleaned his wounds while the vehicle bounced and jostled. "Is that the why of it, eh?" he said. "Why else would I help such a wretch?" "I think you've become smitten with me." Thatch smiled, then winced as Colette rubbed hard at dried blood on his bruised cheek. "Smitten with you? Such imaginative tales you tell. Pirate ships, time travels. Now a fantasy about me having feelings for you. I dare say you've been knocked dense." Thatch took her hands, stopping the cleaning. "I may have been beaten senseless, but me heart is still beating. It quickens when I see you. Me skin tingles from your touch. Your voice is like music to me ears, and your eyes draw me like the sea." Colette stared into Thatch's eyes, his strong hands holding hers. Why does this rogue intrigue me so? There is intelligence and humor behind this devilish facade. The moment was thick with attraction and the crackle of electricity between them. He slowly moved toward her, still holding her hands. Thump! Slide! The carriage bounced and sharply turned a corner, sending Colette and Thatch crashing against the door. "What the devil is going on out there?" Thatch yelled. "We're being pursued!" yelled Philip from the driver's bench. Thatch looked out the window and saw several men on horseback pursuing them, guns pointed in their direction. Upon seeing Thatch's head lean out the window, one of the men took a shot at him that sent him ducking back inside. Thatch saw the armaments that Tom had picked up and placed inside the cab. He pulled a pistol from its holster and leaned out the window again, firing back at the riders. The speed and reckless driving of the carriage caused his aim to be poor, and he emptied the chamber without hitting any of the pursuers. Colette handed him another loaded pistol and took the empty one from him. He watched her for a quick moment as she started to reload the spent pistol, thinking he was truly, completely smitten with her as well. He leaned out the window again, and bam! A rifle fired a round so near his head that the bullet whizzed by his ear. He turned back to see Tom leaning around the carriage firing at the horse riders. Tom had one eye squinted as he sighted down the barrel that was much too long for him to control on the jouncing carriage. "Damn it, boy! Watch where you aim! You almost blew me ear clean off," he yelled at Tom. "Sorry, Captain," Tom said, then turned in his seat to lean over the roof of the carriage so as not to hit Thatch as he fired back on the riders. The horsemen were gaining on them, and their aim was improving as they continued to fire at the carriage. "Faster, man, faster!" Thatch yelled at Philip. Philip grimaced as he snapped the reins, urging the foaming horses to speed up. He knew the single riders were going to catch them eventually. He needed a new plan if they were going to get away. Looking ahead, Philip could see a wagon up ahead, carrying a load of barrels going in the same direction as they were. He wasn't sure what was in those barrels, but it gave him an idea. The man driving the wagon looked back at the sounds of gunfire and commotion that were rapidly approaching him. He snapped his reins to speed his team to get away from the coming maelstrom. Philip steered the thundering carriage toward the wagon, coming up alongside of it. He could see the driver's ghost-white face of fear as they raced side by side. The two vehicles bumped and clattered against each other, the barrels bouncing dangerously in the back. Philip began to take a lead as the man tried to slow down his team to let the chaos pass him by. As an intersection quickly approached, Philip further turned his carriage into the wagon, banging against the side and sharply cutting the man off as he skidded around the corner to the right. The awkward momentum caused the wagon to lose control, the right side wheels coming off the ground. Philip's carriage made the turn, but the wagon wasn't so successful. The tongue of the wagon broke free as it twisted, and the horses raced ahead without their burden, leaving the tilted wagon behind. The wagon spun and crashed, a dozen barrels spilling into the street. The driver, thrown to the ground, rolling forward as his momentum carried him yards away from the splintered wreck. The horsemen reined in as the blockade appeared in front of them. One of the riders was thrown from his horse to smash into the obstruction of barrels and wagon parts that littered the street. Philip looked back to see the pursuers fall far behind. He took a left turn at the next street, slowing a bit so as not to wreck his own carriage and means of escape. Once they were many blocks away, Philip slowed further so they would cease attracting so much attention speeding through the crowded streets. Blackbeard leaned his head out the window to see they had lost the pursuers and turned to Philip. "Where to now?" he asked. Philip took a quick glance back at Blackbeard. "I shall deliver you to your ship, dear captain." Woods Rogers strode through the calamity, ignoring the cries for help and assistance. His forehead was bleeding, and somehow a nail was protruding from his arm, just below the elbow. He looked down at it in distaste. Without stopping, he pulled the nail out and discarded it among the rest of the rubble littering the ground. Smoke still bellowed in wandering clouds around the prison yard. He stepped through the gaping hole made by the explosion that occurred just when he was about to end the life of that wretched Edward Thatch. He looked down the long concrete wall toward the next street. All that could be seen were civilians in various states of shock and confusion. His ears still rung with the sound of loud bells, but something sounded underneath the ringing that caused him to turn around. Jennings was staggering up behind him, calling his name. There was a large gash in the man's bald head, but otherwise he looked unharmed. He couldn't hear what Jennings was saying with the damn ringing sound in his head from the blast. In moments, Cooper and several of his men met up with him. They walked out to the street, and his hearing started to clear. "He got away," Jennings said as he held the empty noose and rope. "I'm aware, you ingrate," Woods said in frustration. Cooper looked around at the streets as bells from a fire brigade could be heard in the distance. "We're going to need more men. We need to kill these bastards, or the mayor is going to have my head on a platter," Cooper commented as Woods's two remaining Navy men ran up with only a couple of Wells Fargo men. "They'll be taking him to the ship if they were successful with their dive," Jennings said. Woods looked at Jennings, then at Cooper. He paced, curling and uncurling his hands into fists. He strode up to Cooper and pointed his finger at him. "The boat, the tugboat, or whatever it was called. The one the harbor master said was boarded by the African pirates. We need to track the captain down and question him. He'll know where the wreck is." "Find the wreck and we find them," Woods said. "I know where the harbor master drinks," said one of Cooper's men. "Then let's go buy the man a drink and get some information out of him," said Cooper. Harbor Master Stillwell had a crowd of 6 men around him at a saloon called Red's. It was a long, narrow pub with a bar that ran almost the entire length of the establishment. Red's was 1 block away from the docks, which is why it was frequented by sailors, fishermen, dock workers, and cops alike. A real working-class place with cheap drinks and greasy food. Below the ever-present odor of beer, there was a persistent underlying smell of salt water and fish that permeated from the patrons' boots and clothes. Stillwell sat on a stool holding court while he polished off a mug of warm beer poured from a wooden keg behind the bar. "Word is these pirates are in league with the James gang," said a young man with the sunken eyes of an opium addict. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. I seen these 2 Africans walking on the docks side by side with Jesse and Frank James," Stillwell said, telling his exaggerated story and wiping beer foam from his lips. "How'd you know it was the real James brothers?" "Them two's wanted posters up all over town, and that strange crew of government men showed me their picture," Stillwell said. "It was definitely them. And let me just say, they had the hard look of killers." "You said they went out on Beekman's tug?" the barkeep asked. "That's right, and if he were here, he'd vouch for every word I'm saying," Stillwell said, looking around to see that Beekman wasn't in the bar tonight. "He's usually here by this time," the barkeep said, looking at his pocket watch. "Maybe Jesse James killed him," the sunken-eyed man said. "What business would the James gang have with a tugboat?" another man asked. "Yes, what business indeed," Woods Rogers said upon overhearing the conversation as he entered the pub with Cooper, Jennings, and several other members of their group. Stillwell stared, a bit startled at Woods' scarred face. "You'd told us you didn't see Jesse James last time we spoke," Cooper said, putting a heavy hand on Stillwell's shoulder. "Now I hear you telling he was walking alongside the two African pirates. So which is it?" Stillwell looked around nervously as his barmates faded from his side and the group of men surrounded him. I said I didn't think I saw Jesse James with them, but maybe he was there." "Maybe he was there?" Jennings asked with malicious undertones. "Yeah, well, I might have just seen them from the back is all." "That's not the story you were just telling your friends," Jennings said. "Well, see, I had time to think and reflect on the memory, and I think I can say with high probability it was them James brothers boarding the tug alongside the Africans." Cooper looked hard at Stillwell, deciding if the man was telling tales or not. He looked at Woods, who seemed dubious as well. The door of the pub opened, and an upbeat Beekman entered with his two divers, Stefan and Peter, in tow. The men were smiling and backslapping each other as they headed toward the bar. The men had just pocketed several years' worth of pay on a single job with a cut of gold from the pirate ship they helped raise. The happy planning on how it was going to be spent prompted the men to enjoy a celebratory drink at Red's Tavern. Their good fortune even colored the near-death experience that Peter had had while diving on the Queen Anne's Revenge. Stillwell's eyes lit up when he saw Beekman enter, and he happily pointed the man out to Cooper and his group. "There's the man you're looking for, not me. There's Captain Beekman," he said. Beekman turned to see the group of stern men approaching, and if his face wasn't so sun-darkened, it would have turned white as a sheet. "You Beekman?" Cooper asked. "Yeah. Who wants to know?" he said, as the group surrounded him and his two divers, blocking the way back to the exit. "You the one in league with pirates and bank robbers?" Woods Rogers asked. "I don't know what you're talking about," Beekman said, then turned away from the group to motion to the barkeep. "Bring us some beers, Red." Cooper unfolded the wanted poster with the Jesse and Frank James drawing on it and slapped it down on the bar in front of Beekman. "You took these two men on your tug to dive a shipwreck?" Cooper asked. Beekman looked hard at the poster. "Jesse James? What the dickens would Jesse James be doing on a tug? And what makes you think I'd be aligned with a wanted killer and bank robber? I've been working this harbor many years, making an honest living, mind you." "You took two African pirates and probably several others out on your boat in search of Blackbeard's treasure," Woods said, inching his face real close to Beekman's. Beekman, annoyed, pushed Woods away. "Get your ugly mug out of my face." The two divers stood up from their stools to back up Beekman, but then Cooper and his men pulled out their pistols, as well as Jennings and the Navy men with Woods. Beekman slowly raised his hands as the serious nature of the situation sunk in. Beekman had never found himself with so much firepower pointed at him before. He decided that keeping secrets wasn't worth the cost of his life. Besides, he, Stefan, and Peter had already hidden their treasure in a safe location. Giving up the pirates' location would not include giving up their loot, at least that was what Beekman hoped. "Look, we just came in for a drink. We ain't looking for no trouble," Beekman said slowly as he watched Stillwell slip out of the bar. "You're going to be in a whole world of trouble if you don't start telling us what we want to know, understand?" Cooper growled. Beekman sighed and nodded his head. "Good," Cooper said. "Now then," Woods said, as he pulled out a nautical map of the San Francisco Bay and flattened it out on the bar. "Where is the location you took those pirates to?" I hope you're enjoying this historical fiction book with pirates and time travel all wound together in it. You can find the ebook and physical books at my website, briancantrell.com. You can also find the second book in this series, Pirates of World War II. And if you're a fan of pirates, you can check out thepiraterepublic.com. It's a weekly newsletter that I put out every Friday. All sorts of great pirate history, events, news, and happenings. You can also toss a few doubloons our way by joining our Patreon at Patreon, The Pirate Republic. We'll see you next week. Till then, fair winds and keep a weathered eye.